Hey, shalom, shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem Kakodash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone, who all in this truth from me well. Peace and salutations to the 144,000 and the rest of the 1/3, the large multitude. Unto you I say shalom. Coming to you back with another lesson through the Spirit. And the title for this was going to be The Road to the Kingdom Won't Be Easy. Because ultimately, we know that the road to the kingdom of heaven, which is going to be here on the planet Earth, is a straight gate. It isn't no easy path, no easy way in, because ultimately, when you come into this knowledge, wisdom, and understanding, now you're completely an enemy of his world. You make yourself an enemy of your own family, the friends that you had in the world before you came into this truth. And ultimately, you make yourself an enemy against Esau, Edom, the self-proclaimed white man, especially the wicked elite, the top elite who run this world, they run the banking system, run the economy, run the governments. Now they know who you are, because now you're openly prophesying against their kingdom. And when Esau, Edom finally comes down with that great wrath, not just against the whole world, but ultimately against the prophets, the men of the Lord, he's going to want to put hands on us. But ultimately, we know that Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai is going to keep majority of his men. But ultimately, we're going to have to be in the midst of Jacob's trouble, be in the midst of martial law, and even some brothers might have to, be a martyr for this truth, because that's what comes with serving Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai. But majority of Jake, these so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, they're not willing to walk that straight and narrow path, because ultimately they're scared to lose their lives. Because that's all Jake knows. Jake doesn't know that death is really a relief from this life, because this current life that we're in slavery, we're in captivity. We're subjects against our adversary, the devil, Esau, Edom, the self-proclaimed white man. And we know that this isn't living. And that's why we're looking forward towards the kingdom of heaven. But we know that things have to get worse. This economy has to tank more and more. The society has to collapse as a whole. And all hell has to break loose. World War III has to go nuclear. And eventually the great destruction of America, Babylon the Great. All these things have to happen for us to get delivered, us to the hopeful elect. And Lord willing, we be a part of the elect, be a part of that number. Because majority of Jake isn't going to make it. They're not going to walk that straight and narrow path, because it's difficult. Now you have to put off the world. You have to put off the flesh, all the lust of the flesh. You have to put yourself last. You have to put Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai first. And most Jake, these so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, they're not willing to do that, because they rather do their own so-called their own will. Because Jake believes that they have free will. They believe that, they're better off doing their own thing than to serve Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai. And that's why the majority of Jake is not going to make it. 2/3 of Jake here in America, they're prophesied to be destroyed by the way of that fire, that second death. That's the end. That's going to be the end for majority of Jake. Ultimately, for walking that broad road, that broad gate that's going to lead to destruction. It's going to lead them to take that MOTB, take that Charagma, and be destroyed. It says Acts chapter 14 and verse 22, confirming the souls of the disciples and exhorting them to continue in the faith, and that we must, through much tribulation, enter into the kingdom of the Most High. That's right, through much tribulation. We're going to have to go through the trials and tribulations, all the hell we have to catch, the infirmities, people coming against us, our own people, demons fucking with you, all day trying to make you to go off, try to make you fall out the truth. These are all things that us that are in the truth have to go through, because ultimately Yahweh Shemiah Shai is testing us. He's testing our integrity. Are we going to endure? Are we going to quit? Or are we going to, tough it out to the end? Because ultimately we have to endure to the end to be delivered. We can't just sprint our way out of here. No, it's a marathon. The race isn't given to the swift. We know ultimately that it's a marathon and not a race. That's why a lot of Jake falls out the truth, because they get desperate. They want the kingdom now. They want it, they want their consolation on this side, but ultimately we know that we have to be long suffering. We have to go through all these different things to build us up. Ultimately, because right now we're in a period of testing, trying out for rulership, and the majority of Jake isn't doing that right now. Majority of Jake is filling their own belly, going after the things of the world, trying to fill the lust of the flesh. They're not worried about Yahweh Shemiah Shai. They're not worried about the kingdom of heaven. They're worried about this kingdom. They're trying to build on this side. That's what Jake is worried about. This is Matthew chapter 7 and verse 13. Enter ye in at the straight gate, for wide is the gate, and broad is the way that leadeth to destruction, and many there be which go in thereat. That's right. Us to the hopeful elect, we're going through that straight gate right now, and Lord willing, we endure to the end, we'll be delivered. The majority of the nation of Israel, the 2/3, the so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, they're going through that broad way, not coming back and repenting to Yahweh Shemiah Shai, ultimately because they don't want to be held, they don't want to hold themselves accountable. That has always been the case. They'd rather go after these different gods, these different idols, worship Christianity, worship Catholicism, worship Islam, because it feels good to the flesh. Because when you come into this knowledge, wisdom, and understanding, you come back to Yahweh Shemiah Shai in truth and sincerity, it's completely contrary to the flesh. You got to deny the flesh. You got to fast. You got to pray. You got to read. You got to do these lessons. You got to sacrifice your time for Yahweh Shemiah Shai. Majority of Jake, they're not willing to do that. They're not willing to lay their lives down for this truth. Be a martyr for Yahweh Shemiah Shai. But ultimately, that's why majority of Jake is going to get destroyed. A lot of them are going to perish by famine, diseases, pestilences, the sword, get put in these detention centers, ultimately get karagmat up, get micro C hit up to be reserved for those missiles. That's going to be the end for majority of Jake, for not walking into the straight gate, for rather walking in that broad way. Verse 14, because straight is the gate and narrow is the way which leadeth unto life, and few there be that find it. That's right. Many have been called, but only a few are going to be chosen. And we're hoping, we're praying, we're giving diligence to make our calling and election sure. Majority of Jake isn't doing that. They're out here still in the world, worried about the Diddy case, worried about the NFL, worried about all these different distractions, when all hell is about to break loose. The economy is about to collapse, the dollar's about to collapse, World War III, the U.S. is about to get involved, but yet Jake isn't worried about all that. They're worried about, chasing the bag, chasing Eve, chasing Box, trying to establish themselves on this side, not knowing that we're in hell, we're under captivity, we're not meant to thrive on this side, because ultimately this isn't our rest. Yahweh Shemiah Shai said, arise ye and depart, for this is not your rest. That's why majority of Jake is going to get destroyed, because they're trying to be comfortable on this side. They're trying to chill on this side, when ultimately we're not here to chill. We're here for punishment. We're here for slavery, for going off, for sinning against Yahweh Shemiah Shai. This is 2nd Ezra chapter 7 and verse 16. There is also another thing. A city is builded and set up on a broad field, and is full of all good things. That's right, that good thing, that city, that's the kingdom of heaven. Where we're finally get rest, not worry about being subject to an alarm clock, going to these 9 to 5s, being subject to payments, living paycheck to paycheck, not knowing where your food comes from, GMO foods, polluted water, polluted air. The mindset on these people, completely off as hell. They're worshiping the image of the beast. And even us, we're in these corrupted bodies, we're in these chains of darkness, sinning when we don't want to. We hate going off, but yet we're still in these chains of darkness. Therefore, we're calling out to Yahweh Shemel Shai. We're pleading, we're praying to be delivered out of these bodies, because ultimately these bodies are corrupted. They're weak, they're frail. They're subject to sickness, diseases, infirmities. Ultimately we know that we need deliverance from this current captivity, from this kingdom of Satan. Verse 7, the entrance thereof is narrow, and is set in a dangerous place to fall, like as if there were fire on the right hand and on the left a deep water. And that's how difficult this straight gate is. You got fire on your right, and you got deep water on your left. It's not supposed to be an easy walk, an easy path. And that's why majority of Jake isn't willing to walk this path of going putting off the sinful nature, coming back to the ways of Yahweh Shemel Shai. Most Jake isn't willing to do that, because now they have to deny themselves and put Yahweh Shemel Shai first. Verse 8, and one only path between them both, even between the fire and the water, so small that they could but one man go there at once. That's right. Ultimately, when we come into this truth, we have to work out our own salvation with fear and trembling. And most Jake, they don't want to walk this walk alone. They don't want their family members to go up against them. They don't want to lose their women, their wife, their children, their friends that they had in the world. They don't want to detach themselves. They may have to leave their job for another job so they can make more time for the ministry. Majority of Jake isn't willing to do that. They don't want to give up those things, because they want their kingdom now. They want their happy wife, happy life. They want their white picket fence, the dog, the children, the 2 cars, and the vacation. That's what Jake wants. They're not worried about the kingdom of heaven, because they don't have that rulership mentality. They have that slave mentality. They have Stockholm syndrome. They think that being under the self-proclaimed white man, Esau Edom, isn't so bad. Now we can work these jobs. We can make these dollars. That's all Jake is worried about. And that's why they don't want to walk that straight gate, because then they would have to lose all those things. They would have to truly deny themselves for Yahweh Shemel Shai. Verse 9, if the city now were given unto a man for an inheritance, if he shall never pass the danger set before it, how shall he receive this inheritance? And that's right. Ultimately, to receive that inheritance, be joint rulers with Yahweh Shai, be delivered up into the chariots, be changed into those new bodies. We have to go through the straight and narrow path, the straight gate, which isn't easy at all. It's a very difficult path, which majority of the nation of Israel, so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, they're not willing to walk that path because it's hard. You have to go through the trials and tribulations. You have to be a public enemy, number one. You're gonna have your face plastered on TV. You're gonna be on the most wanted posters. You're gonna have all these different, UN troops looking for you. Majority of Jake don't want that. They want to be cool with the enemy, be cool with Esau Edom. They want to be cool with the world. But like Yahweh Shemel Shai said, you're a friend of this world, and that makes you an enemy of Yahweh Shemel Shai, roughly paraphrasing. So majority of Jake, they don't want to be a enemy of the world. They want to be a friend of the world, which we know is if this world loves you, then Yahweh Shemel Shai isn't with you, because ultimately when you come to this knowledge, wisdom, and understanding, Now you make yourself an enemy of the world, because now you're prophesying against this wicked world, and they don't like that. They don't like that you're telling them that they're going off. That they're gonna go into captivity. That 2/3 of Jake is gonna get put to death by fire. They don't want to hear those things because it hurts their feelings. And ultimately the nation of Israel, they've always came up against the prophets of Yahweh Bashim Yahushai, and it's gonna be no different in these upcoming times. This is Matthew chapter 10 and verse 12. And ye shall be hated of all men for my name's sake, but he that endureth to the end shall be saved. And that's right. Ultimately, we're going to be hated from the whole world, from our own people, the nation of Israel, to these wicked elite, these Edomites, these heathen nations, because ultimately they know what the message we come with. We come with the message, the prophets of doom. We're prophesying the destruction of this kingdom. We're prophesying the destruction of Esau, Edom, self-proclaimed white man. We're telling 2/3 of our people that they're going to get destroyed for refusing to repent to Yahweh Bashim Yahushai. They don't like to hear that. But ultimately that's what comes with the territory. That's what comes with serving Yahweh Bashim Yahushai. And that's why majority of Jake, they're not willing to come into this truth, because now they're going to be hated from, the world's going to hate them, and they don't want that. They want to be loved by this world. That's why Jake is constantly chasing the bag, chasing fame, chasing social media, clout, fame, because they want to be loved by this world. They don't want to be hated. But that's what comes with serving Yahweh Bashim Yahushai. Is going to come with all these different trials and tribulations, all these infirmities, having to catch all hell from your own family, your old friends that you had in the world, people calling you bugged out, people calling you crazy. That's what comes with serving Yahweh Bashim Yahushai. But ultimately, that's what we have to go through. We have to go through Jacob's trouble. We have to go through martial law in the hour of temptation, the mass implementation of the MOTB. We may have to go through seeing our family members get put to death. Bodies everywhere, blood everywhere. Blood to your knees. And majority of Jake can't stomach that. That's why it's too bitter for them. They just want to eat the sweet, the honey. They just want to know that they're Israelites, and that's it. That's where majority of Jake, that's where it stopped for them. Just knowing that you're an Israelite, wear your fringes. But they don't want to hear the bitter. They don't want to hear that you're going to have to go through hell, go through trials and tribulations and catch infirmities, and ultimately be an enemy, of this world. Eventually, it's going to get to the point where the wicked elite, they're going to accuse the prophets of Yahweh Bashim Yahushai, and Jake don't want that. They don't want that soak. They don't want that smoke. They want to be friends with Esau, Edom. Ultimately, that's going to be a snare and trap, because Esau, Edom, and these wicked elite, they're going to come down on the whole world to get to the nation of Israel, comprised of these so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans. But we know that the elect are going to be covered. They're going to have that dawah, that mark of exemption. And that's why we're giving diligence to, Lord willing, be covered in that day when all hell breaks loose. And if we endure to the end, then we'll be safe. And that's what we're looking forward to. We're looking forward to the kingdom of heaven. We're looking forward to righteousness being pushed out throughout the four corners of the earth. We're looking forward towards those new bodies, but we know that we're going to have to go through that straight and narrow gate, which isn't going to be easy. But that's pretty much the point. I pray that this is edifying to the elect. I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem Kakodash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone, who I learned this truth from the well. Peace and salutations to the 144,000 and the rest of the 1/3, the large multitude. Unto you I say shalom.